All the marts have pretty greed, dear, and they show it pearly clean. Only jackknives have all marts, dear, and they keep them out of sight. When the marts bite with their signs, dear, green bank notes fly all over. Cheapest goods sell in Walmart, dear, and there's not a trace of theft. On the sidewalks every morning lie most purses oozing life. Someone sneaking round the corner. Is that someone Mart the knife? From the countries cross the water, where the salaries are drooping down, outsourcing just for profit, dear. Bet Walmart's right in town. The young boys disappeared, dear, fighting Vietnam's communists. And Walmart sells made in China. Did business do something rash? Nice birdie plucked, pigeon despoiled with your disappearing cash. Oh, the line forms on the left, dear, now that marts reign all over town.
In Jules Massenet's opera, Thais is living in Alexandria. She is on the verge of repenting for her sin under the good words of Nathanael, a monk who has as his goal to make a Christian out of the most famous courtesan of the time. For those who do not know the ending in the opera, it is not exactly what our noble monk had envisioned. Thais meditates, and you can hear it, to decide to become a Christian, while Nathanael succumbs to his sudden passion for her. He had the very bad idea to fall in love with her, and he may be the one who eventually will end up in hell, while Thais will die as a saint received in heaven. At that point, my problem is that I start to believe that the title of my show is inappropriate. After listening to the music of Thais meditating, I am inclined to slightly modify the title by exchanging the word great to the word cheap, I am not even sure that the word prostitute is appropriate, for those that we consider usually as prostitute still have a heart, when the prostitute in my show have definitely lost theirs. Our story begins at the end of World War II. With victory came the promise that everything was going to be for the best in the best of worlds. The spirit of the time was expressed in the Charter of the United Nations, signed in 1945, which basically promised equality and a decent life for everyone on earth. A report to the General Assembly in 1949 stated that 1% of the gross product of the industrialized country would ensure the underdeveloped country with self-sustaining development by the end of the century. Optimism was so overflowing that the Canadian-born American economist John Kenneth Galbraith was wondering in his book The Affluent Society, published in 1958, how the future society could be occupied. The Hudson Institute published a 1,000-page report predicting what life would be in the year 2000, when Americans would have 13 weeks vacation, 147 days of work, and 218 days free every year. The men who wrote those books and reports were not stupid dreamers with their head in the clouds. They were using actual facts and numbers to predict what would happen in a logical future. But then, what happened to the 13 weeks vacation? I have already said that society is not anymore the two-class society of Karl Marx, bourgeoisie and proletariat, but a three-classes society. The poor, the more or less rich, and the aliens understand the rich. Those three classes represent the ownership of all the assets of the world. But there is another way to consider the world. It is through its political, economic, and scientific aspects. I should say rather division rather than aspects. For the 13 weeks vacation, the no overgrowing of the population would have been possible if all the energy and knowledge of all nations had been gathered in a common effort. But it is exactly the reverse that took place. In a total lack of coordination, nations which were previously independent or self-sustaining and now are more or less dependent on each other to survive, conflict in a global system that they are so far developed. The result is that the problems which are addressed are basically problems of a moment. They are dealt with band-aids instead of considering the long-term problems, those who will determine the future. As a more immediate result, the developing nations are lagging behind, while a third of the world, the population is practically starving, and the population itself growing by billions. We can say that today our society is made of four components: governments, multinational corporations, non-governmental organization, and science. We will have a short look at every one of them. Science developed whatever the context. It did so in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, and in the United States. During the Cold War in 1970, two eminent Russian scientists were studying with their counterparts in the combustion laboratory in Princeton University the techniques, the technology of rockets that they would send to each other to kill each other over space. The problem is that governments have their own agenda without considering what is going on in science, maybe at the exception of military application. Non-governmental organization. There are millions of them, from the Union Workers Union to the fishermen who wants to defend their own little corner on the river, to those who go to the help of destitute populations, and a lot of others fighting for the most diverse causes. They supply needs, or try to supply needs, where governments are inefficient. Multinational corporations. They have the reputation of being more powerful than governments. In fact, they just follow the natural trend of capitalism, like were their counterparts of the 14th or 15th century, moving the factory out of town to put it in the country where salaries were way lower than in town, and the woman had the salary of a third of the men. 14th century or today, the motivation is exactly the same and can be resumed in only one word: profit. Governments. We enter here a very foggy area of the first component of our society, government. It would seem relatively easy to establish a clear distinction between government and big corporation, but it is not. It is not for the reason that many members of the government are associated with big corporations. If you want to dig a little more to find out who is who, or who is what, or what is what, you will find out that the same persons are in politics and in business. Then, after that, you can suggest innocently that the government are for nothing in the business moves, or cannot do anything about it. To add to the confusion, do not forget that the policies of the nations are elaborated at government level. It is, for example, at government level that it decided the percentage of the budget that goes to the military. At the exception of exceptional expenses, half of the budget goes to the military, and half of that go to subcontractors. This is not to dissipate the confusion on who is who and what is what, and the whole affair seems like a family business. At the end of World War II, America was the most productive country in the world. At the beginning of the 21st century, America is the less productive country in the world. Almost everything that you have in hand and turn over is labeled made in China. The 17th century, the century of the scientific revolution, was followed by the 18th century Industrial Revolution. Unfortunately, the greatest success of the Industrial Revolution was to put humanity at the service of industry instead of putting industry at the service of humanity. The latest revolution, the computer revolution, has completely transformed the modes of human exchanges. time and distance seem to have been obliterated from calculations. These made available to industry the immense resources of labor of the Asian countries, especially China. Not only labor, but cheap labor. Comparatively, the national labor became too expensive, both to vie against competition and second, to maintain or augment profit. The national production came into what economists call the diminishing profit, which marks the time to stop production. Thus, instead of keeping high what made the spirit of America, even asking Americans to make efforts like they did during the war to keep industry in the country, the big corporation, with the complicity of governments, sold America to Asia. They sold America to Asia, especially its middle class and specialized workers. They sold America for money. The money was not redistributed back to the losers. The money went to the books and banks of those corporations. The big corporation prostituted also their savoir-faire, completing the trade with offshoring. The word means that many manufacturing companies dressed in colored multinational clothes moved their different departments to different countries. At home remains only management and finances, when they do not localize elsewhere under what you could call flag of complacence. With offshoring went the technologies that are now in countries which develop their own research very rapidly, and with offshoring, accountability became very imprecise. Hence, you can say that some corporations have more power than government in globalization. Sooner or later, all the nations in the world are trying to reach or will be reaching the same level of science and technology. This is in the order of things. There is no reason why a part of the world would have forever an edge over the rest of the world. This does not change the fact, however, that corporations did not practice outsourcing and offshoring by altruism. They did it by pure greed. The worker and the people were not consulted before the corporation moved offshore or outsourced their industry, for the very simple reason that they do not count. Human feelings are not accounted for in the column of profits. This is the reason why I changed the title of the show from great to cheap. At least the courtesan ties at class. She was able to abandon her possession to gain her place in paradise. Ask our corporation to do the same. They would rather lose their place in paradise for possession of material goods. But what is the more hypocritical in the whole affair is that some of the participants in the big business are also running for office, supposedly to defend the defenseless and poor citizens that they exploit. In reality, they are run by ambition to put political power on top of financial power and to reach total power. There is with no doubt a deep moral conflict and also a conflict of interest at pretending sitting on two chairs at the same time, especially when everybody knows that the elected representative will always be on the side of where he or she belongs, big business. The strengths of a great country do not reside in the momentary numbers of its guns or aircraft carriers. The old Roman saying, si vis pacem para bellum, if you want peace, prepare for war, never worked. Everybody knows that the Roman Empire fell. All empires fell for the same reason that armed peace inexorably is artificial. A country is great by the example it gives to the rest of the world. It has to be governed by individuals who have enough culture and understanding to make the right decision, especially in their relations with the rest of the world. In order to have a government with a true representation of the people, Planet asks for banning from running all individuals who have been involved in the board of directors of one of the 100 top companies in the world or subcontractors for the army and main shareholders. Based on Planet philosophy, which demonstrates that to make a drawing you have to have a surface on which to draw and a tool to draw on that surface. Otherwise, the surface and the drawing tool are useless. The same is that for capital and labor, without labor, capital is useless, and without capital, labor is useless. Logically, that infers that capital and labor should be at parity, but capital always dictated its law to labor, which by the way demonstrates that democratic capitalism never existed. So far, the notion of profit has always twisted the purpose of industry by creating an artificial gap between the value of goods at their production and their sales as commodities. Industrial capital resulting from profit is taken out of the Commonwealth. Planet asks for its return to the Commonwealth by transferring the ownership of industry to those who make it possible, the workers. The capital necessary to create or to operate industry is guaranteed by the government, but with no socialist ownership by the government. Profit is not anymore the director of industry. Competition has to be not for profit, but for better goods. Salaries are the only source of income in industry. Salaries, including CEOs, have to be fixed by common accord in a determined industry. We create a national industry. At the departure point, Planet Education program is a threefold program. The second fold is exposure to all the arts. The third fold is back to nature, flying, sailing, horse riding, and so on. It is stipulated as much as possible that all those activities, aside of creating numerous jobs of instructors and workers, have to be basically made of material made in America. Another aspect of the recreate industry in America is the extension or the creation of an extended network of public transportation, which also would create numerous jobs. The question usually asked after exposing the Planet program is, all that is very nice, but how will you fund your program, and especially the program of education, flying, sailing, and so on? But this is another story.